At age 63, Bo Jackson is still spoken of as one of the most singular cases in American sports, not because of a long career or a pile of accumulated titles, but because he reached peaks that history had no prepared spot for. Bo Jackson is the only athlete to ever make the MLB All-Star Team 1989 and the NFL Pro Bowl 1990, a feat that remains unrepeated to this day. He won the Heisman Trophy in 1985 at Auburn, the most prestigious individual award in American college football, and became the absolute symbol of power and speed at the NCAA level. In the NFL, even though he only played 4 full seasons for the Los Angeles Raiders, Bo Jackson still averaged more than 5.4 yards per carry, an extraordinary number for a running back, and was selected to the Pro Bowl in 1990, despite not playing full-time because he was also playing baseball. In MLB, wearing the uniform of the Kansas City Royals and later the Chicago White Sox, he hit 141 home runs, made the All-Star Game, appeared in the ALCS twice, and became a nightmare for opposing outfielders with his throws from the outfield wall straight to home plate. Bo Jackson never won a Super Bowl or a World Series, but he achieved something far rarer: absolute recognition that he was a biological standard beyond the system. Nike's Bo Knows campaign was not ordinary advertising. It was a cultural declaration that turned him into a national icon, appearing on the covers of Time and Sports Illustrated, and in the minds of millions of Americans as the embodiment of the final limit. But it was from those seemingly impossible achievements that Bo Jackson's deepest tragedy began. When a hip injury in 1991 led to a vascular necrosis of the femoral head and forced him to undergo artificial hip replacement, his NFL career ended immediately, while his MLB career became only painful attempts. The pain was not in losing the chance for more titles, but in being stripped of the very thing that gave his existence value, the free movement of an extraordinary body. Bo Jackson did not defy fate with words, did not blame the leagues, did not turn tragedy into a tool for pity. He chose silence, withdrawal, and continued living within limits with harsh discipline, carrying the will of a man who understood that some losses cannot be compensated, only accepted. And it is in that quiet endurance that Bo Jackson's legacy rises above any trophy or stat sheet, the legacy of a man who reached the absolute peak, then learned to exist when that peak was taken away forever. If you want to go deeper into the story of the man behind the legend of Bo Jackson, where extraordinary strength began to become an invisible burden, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next part. Bo Jackson was not born into the spotlight, nor was he raised with the indulgence given to a special child. He came into the world in Bessemer, Alabama, a poor, harsh land where life did not teach people to dream, but forced them to learn endurance from a very early age. There, weakness was not seen as a state to be protected, but as a risk to be eliminated. In his large family, Bo Jackson was not held or comforted much, nor given long words of encouragement. What he received most was discipline, toughness, the sense that every passing day was a test of whether you were strong enough to survive. Alabama did not grant Bo Jackson the right to slow down, much less the right to be weak. From a very young age, Bo's body was frighteningly exceptional. He ran faster, jumped higher, and was stronger than all the kids his age. That strength was not something methodically trained. It was as if nature had placed it in his body without any instructions. No one told Bo how strength should be controlled or understood. Adults only saw a child who was too strong, too fierce, too unpredictable. Instead of guidance, Bo was often required to figure out how to adjust himself. But how could a child learn to control something even the adults didn't understand? On the playground, Bo's strength scared the other kids. In the classroom, that overwhelming energy made him seen as trouble. He wasn't a bad kid, but he was frequently viewed as a problem to be managed. And so very early, Bo Jackson learned a cruel lesson: if you are different, you will not be protected, you will be required to carry yourself entirely. Strength, instead of being a gift, gradually became a curse. It left Bo with no refuge, no space to express fear or hurt. While other kids were allowed to cry, Bo was taught to stand tall. While other kids could ask for help, Bo was expected to handle it alone. His family wasn't cruel, but they lived in a world where survival ranked above understanding. Love, if present, was shown through discipline, through teaching children to be tougher, not through listening to their fears. And in that environment, Bo Jackson did not learn to ask for help. He learned to suppress. He learned to stay silent. He learned to endure as a survival reflex. Bo's childhood had no single large event dramatic enough to call a tragedy, but the constant absence of small things, an embrace, a question of concern, an acknowledgement of emotion, quietly created the deepest wound. It was the wound of a child never allowed to be weak, never allowed to admit he was overwhelmed. Bo's strength made others think he needed no shelter, and gradually, he came to believe it too. He didn't know how to say he was tired. He didn't know how to say he was afraid. He only knew to keep moving forward, to keep bracing himself, because stopping meant becoming a burden. It was in that context that the foundation of Bo Jackson's tragedy was formed, not through tears or violence, but through a silent, prolonged loneliness stretching over many years. When a child grows up never allowed to be weak, he becomes an adult who doesn't know how to listen to his own limits. Bo Jackson entered his teenage years with an ever stronger body, but an inner self already accustomed to self-sealing. He didn't seek attention, didn't complain, didn't rebel. He only did the one thing he knew: keep enduring, and keep proving he was strong enough. But no one noticed that each time he proved his strength, he was also learning to ignore the faintest signals from himself. Childhood in Alabama taught Bo Jackson how to stand firm against adversity, but it also unintentionally taught him a dangerous lesson, that a person's value lies in their ability to endure, not in their right to be hurt. And that very lesson, while carrying him through poverty and being overlooked, became the seed for later tragedy, when he entered a world ready to exploit his strength to the utmost, but never taught him how to stop. Stepping out of the harsh childhood in Alabama, Bo Jackson carried with him not dreams of glory, but a body that didn't know how to stop. When he arrived at Auburn University, he didn't come as a student eager to prove himself with words. He came as a phenomenon that forced everyone who witnessed it to recalibrate their concept of human limits. From the very first practices, Bo Jackson displayed a combination of power, speed, reflexes that coaches could not explain with the textbooks or sports science of the time. He wasn't just stronger, he was strong in a way that made others uneasy. He wasn't just fast, he was fast enough that defensive angles seemed to vanish before they could form. On Auburn's field, Bo Jackson didn't play like a typical running back. He charged like a non-negotiable natural force, unrelenting, merciless, unstoppable. Those runs through the defense didn't resemble a sports contest. They looked like a body breaking the structure of the game itself. Every time he touched the ball, spectators no longer asked if he would be stopped. They only wondered what he would break this time. Alongside football, Bo also competed in track and field, where his speed continued to render every measuring tool meaningless. The physical tests were no longer for evaluation, they merely confirmed that Auburn possessed something beyond NCAA norms. The numbers Bo Jackson produced didn't need much promotion, because the eyes of those who saw him said it all. This wasn't a talent in development, it was a body already complete before the world was ready. The Heisman Trophy in 1985 came to Bo Jackson not as a reward for effort, but as a confirmation of destiny. It didn't honor a season, it honored an obvious truth. America was witnessing a type of athlete that had never existed before. The media began searching for new words, because the old ones were no longer sufficient. Superhuman wasn't exaggerated praise. It was the only way to describe the helplessness felt when trying to describe a body beyond comparison. Articles didn't just report stats, they conveyed astonishment. Commentators didn't analyze tactics, they analyzed the fear opponents felt facing Bo Jackson. But in the midst of that deification, something dangerous began to take shape. Bo Jackson's body was no longer seen as part of the man, it became his entire identity. Bo wasn't asked what he thought, how he felt, or where his limits lay. All the world cared about was how many more limits that body could break, and Bo, raised from childhood in the belief that his value lay in endurance, had no language to resist it. He didn't know how to question boundaries, because his entire life had never taught him that boundaries existed. Auburn became the place where Bo Jackson reached his first peak, but also where his body began to be defined as a tool. The cheers, the glowing articles, the prestigious awards carried no warning. No one told Bo that no biology could sustain maximum output forever. No one said that a body, no matter how extraordinary, had finite endurance. In the world of American college sports, where victory was worshipped and failure forgotten, Bo Jackson was encouraged to go farther, stronger, faster, without any mechanism to protect the very thing creating his value. And Bo kept doing the only thing he knew, responding with action. He didn't hold back, didn't step away, didn't ask for rest. Each time he stepped onto the field, he pushed his body a little closer to the edge, because that was the only way he knew to exist in the world's gaze. The Heisman Trophy placed him at the pinnacle of college football, but it also slammed the door on another path, the path of caution. From that moment, Bo Jackson was no longer seen as a developing human being, but as a phenomenon to be fully exploited before it vanished. And in that blinding spotlight, the future tragedy began to be written line by line, silently, without any alarm bells. The body born to break every limit was being placed on a trajectory that no one, not even Bo Jackson, was awake enough to see had no safe exit. Stepping out of Auburn, with the Heisman Trophy as a verdict of destiny, Bo Jackson did not enter professional life via a safe or cautious path, but through a choice that forced his own body to pay the price from very early on. He decided to live simultaneously in the two most brutal worlds of American sports, the NFL and MLB, not as an experiment, but as a declaration that he refused to be limited by any template. Fall meant the violent collisions of football, where every carry was a life-or-death confrontation with heavier, more ferocious bodies trained to destroy. Spring and summer meant endless flights, thousands of repeated swings, long throws from the outfield that demanded terrifying loads on shoulders and hips. There was no transition period, no full recovery time, no quiet interval for the body to heal itself. Bo Jackson was literally torn in two, one half living in the controlled violence of the NFL, the other half ground down by the relentless intensity of MLB. Doctors, coaches, and even those who had witnessed legends break before understood that no body was designed to endure that pace. Warnings were issued, not loudly, but clearly: the body needs rest, the skeletal system needs time to adapt, and biology does not negotiate with fame. But Bo Jackson grew up in a world that did not permit weakness, and so he had no language to hear caution. He did not see himself as immortal, but he believed he could endure more than others, as he always had since he was a child in Alabama. The media's skepticism about splitting his career did not make him back down. Instead, it became a quiet motivation to keep proving he didn't need to choose. Bo was not chasing safe records, or a career prolonged at all costs. He was chasing the feeling of his own wholeness, which only existed when he moved to the absolute limit of his ability. And so, with each passing year, his body was exploited beyond the threshold of survival, while no one truly saw it. Small pains were dismissed as background noise. Signs of fatigue were accepted as the necessary price. Warnings were pushed to tomorrow. Under the stadium lights and the applause of the crowds, Bo Jackson kept running, kept colliding, kept swinging, as if stopping would mean betraying who he was. Bo's greatness in this phase was not in the statistics, but in the absurd intensity he imposed on himself. He had no light seasons, no time for preservation, because he had never learned to exist at half strength. That very choice made him a national icon, but it also quietly placed his body on a trajectory with no escape. That man was not forced to live two sporting lives at once. He chose it himself, not out of arrogance, but because he did not know any other way to live. And in that seemingly courageous choice, the seeds of collapse were sown in every practice, every flight, every landing. No one saw it growing, because it made no sound. But Bo Jackson's body, no matter how extraordinary, was still the body of a human being. It recorded every collision, every overload, every moment, forced beyond limits without permission to stop. As he continued walking between those two worlds, America saw a legend taking shape. Inside, though, an entity was slowly being worn away, silently, non-negotiably, waiting for the day it could endure no more. When Bo Jackson fully stepped into the peak years of his career, America did not just witness an exceptional athlete. It witnessed a cultural phenomenon that transcended the boundaries of sports. In the Raiders uniform in the NFL and the Royals uniform in MLB, Bo Jackson was no longer simply a player. He became a collective experience. Every time he appeared on the field, it was no longer a game. It was an event. People came to the stadium not just to see the outcome, but to wait for the moment Bo Jackson broke something. A run through the defense as if other bodies didn't exist. A throw from the outfield that left opponents frozen. A home run that defied all familiar logic. In those years, the Raiders didn't just have a running back. The Royals didn't just have an outfielder. America had Bo Jackson as a living symbol of absolute power. Then Bo Nose arrived, and from that moment, every boundary between sports, advertising and pop culture was completely erased. That campaign didn't need a long story, because Bo Jackson's mere presence was the message. Bo knows football. Bo knows baseball. Bo knows everything. That wasn't just a slogan. It was how an entire nation saw him. Images of Bo Jackson running across screens, appearing alongside stars from other fields, made Americans believe they were witnessing a human being without limits. Media outlets, sponsors and networks all clung to that image at once, because it delivered what America always craved: a perfect icon of power, speed and dominance. But right at that peak, a cold truth began to emerge, even if no one wanted to look directly at it. America loved Bo Jackson, but that love was not for his survival. It was for the moments he broke limits, not for the days he needed rest. Schedules did not slow down because Bo Jackson had played too much. Endorsement deals did not care about his body needing recovery. Sports broadcasts did not question the biological lifespan of a man who collided violently in the NFL one day and endured repetitive loads in MLB the next. In that nationwide worship, Bo Jackson's body was gradually separated from the man himself and treated like an entertainment product. Every run was footage, every hit was a highlight, every fall on the field was a moment replayed in slow motion, analyzed, commented on, then quickly replaced by the next one. No one asked Bo Jackson how he felt as one season bled into the next without a full recovery period. No one asked how long a body, no matter how extraordinary, could sustain that pace. And Bo Jackson, accustomed to having his value measured by endurance, did not ask those questions himself. He kept stepping onto the field with the same intensity, the same commitment, because that was the only way he knew to exist under the public's gaze. The media praised him as an unprecedented phenomenon, but no article made room for the fragility hidden behind the highlights. Fans cheered every time he got up after a brutal hit, but no one wondered what was happening inside his hip joint, inside the skeletal system bearing loads beyond standard. In that era, American sports was not designed to question the cost, it was designed to celebrate the moment. And Bo Jackson was the most perfect moment that system had ever possessed. The coldness of public peak did not lie in hatred, but in unconditional love for the performance, while offering zero conditions for the human being behind it. Bo Jackson was loved when he ran faster, hit harder, played fiercer, but if he slowed down, if he stopped, that love would quickly find another icon. And deep in his subconscious, Bo understood that. He didn't say it, didn't resist, didn't negotiate. He simply kept offering his body to the pace the entire nation demanded. The Raiders and Royals enjoyed the years with Bo Jackson the way one enjoys a gift without a warranty. Bo Nose kept spreading, turning him into part of late 80s, early 90s American culture, an icon printed on t-shirts, billboards and collective memory. But alongside that worship ran a systematic blindness. No one, drunk on victory, asked the simplest question: what is the price? No one paused to wonder whether a human being could live forever in the role of a phenomenon. And Bo Jackson, standing at the center of that whirlwind, kept moving forward, carrying a body being depleted day by day with no chance to be heard. Public peak has no compassion, only infinite expectation. And in that expectation, Bo Jackson was loved, honored, worshipped, but never protected. When the brightest lights shine down, the shadows stretch longest behind. And right at that cold peak, the greatest tragedy of Bo Jackson's life quietly drew near. No sound, no warning, waiting for one small enough moment to turn everything America once loved into a wound he would carry for the rest of his life. The fateful moment came to Bo Jackson without the appearance of a catastrophe. It had no horrifying sound of breaking bones, no scene of stretchers rushing onto the field, no panic from the crowd. It arrived quietly, in an NFL game in 1991, amid the familiar rhythm of collisions and the survival instinct that had followed Bo's entire life. When Bo Jackson was pulled down during a tackle, his body twisted in an instant, his hip joint popping out of its natural position. It was a serious dislocation, but in the world Bo had lived in, pain had never been a signal to stop. He sat up, pushed himself to his feet, and then walked away on the very legs that had just betrayed him. The entire stadium erupted. The fans cheered as if they had just witnessed a heroic feat. The commentators praised his toughness. Teammates clapped in approval. In that moment, America saw an indomitable legend, a man who overcame pain through sheer will. No one realized that it was not a display of strength, but a sentence that had already been signed before anyone could read it. Inside Bo Jackson's body, as he walked amid the applause, the blood supply to the bone had been interrupted. The femoral head, which depended entirely on that circulation, began to fall into a state of severe ischemia. This was not a sudden pain one could scream about. It was a slow, silent death process. No sound, no warning, no chance to correct it. Bo Jackson left the field like a victor over adversity, but in reality, he had just walked away from the final version of himself without knowing it. In the hours and days that followed, there was no sign clear enough to make everything stop immediately. Bo was accustomed to his body aching, accustomed to ignoring vague signals, accustomed to getting up when others stayed down. The sports culture he grew up in celebrated exactly this moment, getting up, continuing, not complaining. And Bo did exactly what the world expected of him. But biology does not care about legends. A vascular necrosis did not appear as a punch. It came as a sentence carried out slowly. With every subsequent step, every time the body bore load, the unnourished bone continued to die bit by bit. The cruelest irony of that moment lay in this: if Bo Jackson had not gotten up, if he had been carried off on a stretcher, if everything had stopped sooner, the outcome might have been different. But Bo stood up, and the entire stadium celebrated it. The fans could not be blamed, because they only saw a man stronger than pain. The media could not be blamed, because they only told the story American sports always wanted to tell, the story of resilience. But no one in that moment asked the most important question: what is happening inside? No camera could capture the spreading ischemia in the hip joint. No cheer reached the bone gradually losing its life. And Bo Jackson, who had been taught from childhood that his value lay in endurance, did not ask that question himself. He had no habit of doubting his body, because his entire life had been built on believing it would keep responding. The game ended, the lights dimmed, but the irreversible process had begun. In the days that followed, when the pain did not subside as usual, when the discomfort became strangely different, Bo still did not understand what he was facing, because no one had ever prepared him for this script. In Bo Jackson's world, injuries were things to be overcome, recovery was a matter of time, but this time no exercise was enough to repair, no willpower was enough to reverse biology. Dead bone does not come back to life, and when the doctors finally named what was happening, a vascular necrosis, the sentence was nearly complete. The moment on the field in 1991, replayed thousands of times as a symbol of grit, turned out to be the last second Bo Jackson existed in the form that made America both fear and admire him. That stand-up, amid the cheers, hid a brutal truth that sometimes the most celebrated action is the one that exacts the greatest price. There was no malice, no conspiracy, no obvious mistake, only a system accustomed to consuming moments, and a man accustomed to overcoming pain. And between those two things, an uncompromising biology quietly delivered its verdict. That instant did not end Bo Jackson's career immediately, but it ended a future no one realized was being lost. When Bo walked off the field, the audience saw a legend. Fate, however, saw something else: a body beginning to die from the inside, carrying a sentence that required no courtroom gavel. After the moment, hailed as a symbol of will in 1991, Bo Jackson entered a confrontation with no audience, no scoreboard, and no possibility of victory. A vascular necrosis was unlike any injury he had ever experienced. It did not arrive like a punch. It came as the cold withdrawal of life. Doctors explained it in dry terms. The blood supply to the femoral head had been severed, bone tissue began to die. The process was irreversible. For a man who had always believed his body responded to every command, that conclusion was not just a medical diagnosis, it was a complete denial of his identity. For the first time in his life, Bo Jackson heard an absolute limit, not set by an opponent, not demanded by a coach, but decreed by biology. Irreversible was a statement he had no way to argue against. Willpower could not restore blood flow. Strength could not revive dead bone. Training could not negotiate with tissue death. As the pain intensified and mobility declined, the only remaining option was placed on the operating table: artificial hip replacement, when he was still very young by medical standards for the procedure. That decision was about survival, not to return to the peak, but to be able to walk normally. For Bo, it was the moment his body officially betrayed its owner. What had once been the most loyal tool now became a source of pain and limitation. The NFL ended instantly, with no formal announcement. There was no grand farewell, no farewell season. One day Bo was still a natural force that made entire stadiums hold their breath. The next, the league he had once shaken had no place for him anymore. The brutal reality of professional football is this: when the body no longer complies, the role disappears. What remained was memory and footage. With MLB, the door did not slam shut immediately, but it opened a painful corridor of illusion. Bo tried to return to the baseball field, not out of hope to be what he once was, but because he needed a reason to believe the athlete within him had not fully died. But every run, every twist, every acceleration reminded him that his body had fundamentally changed. The artificial hip imposed limits he had never learned to accept: no sliding, no sharp turns, no hard collisions. What had once been instinct now became forbidden. Bo hit, threw, and tried to fit in, but between willpower and biology lay an unbridgeable gap. MLB became a mirror reflecting his pain, close enough to recall the peak, far enough to make every step a reminder that his time had passed in a way no one chose. Worse than the physical pain was the collapse of identity. Bo Jackson did not just lose a career, he lost the language to define himself. When an entire life had been built on the premise that the body will endure, the body's refusal became an existential crisis. He was not used to asking himself for permission, not used to stopping, not used to listening to pain. Now every decision had to pass through consideration: will this step hurt more? Will that movement exceed the safe threshold? Caution, something he had never been taught, suddenly became the condition for existence. Training sessions gave way to rehab. Adrenaline yielded to painkillers and routine discipline. Cheers gave way to the silence of physical therapy rooms. Outside, the public still remembered Bo Jackson as an invulnerable icon. Inside, he learned to live with a new body, weaker, more limited, and no longer willing to sacrifice infinitely. The destruction of self did not happen in a single day. It was a series of mornings waking up with stiff joints, a series of cautious steps downstairs, a series of nights facing the question, if I'm not an athlete, who am I? The NFL closed like an iron door. MLB lingered like a painful dream that refused to fade. And between those two voids, Bo Jackson stood alone. No stage, no familiar rhythm, forcing him to rebuild his life from the fragments. He did not cry in public, did not blame anyone. His silence was not pride. It was the only way he knew to survive when the old language no longer fit. The body had betrayed its owner, but in that very betrayal, a belated learning began, learning to live without breaking limits, learning to accept a self that was no longer supreme. It was a painful, slow process with no audience, but it was also the only path for Bo Jackson to continue existing after the day everything that had made him was gone. After the hip replacement surgery, and the avascular necrosis diagnosis that slammed the door on the NFL in a single moment, Bo Jackson walked out of the hospital, not as a defeated man, but as a human being who had just been stripped of the only language he had ever used to exist. His entire life, his body had been the answer to every question: who he was, what his value was, where he belonged. When that body betrayed him, those answers dissolved. No more fields to step onto, no more schedules to cling to, no more cheers to underscore his breathing. Only endless long mornings where he woke up with an artificial hip and an unnamed void. Bo did not rage in front of cameras, did not smash his past, did not blame anyone. He chose silence, not out of nobility, but because he did not know what to say when every definition of himself had collapsed. The small everyday questions, "What are you doing today?" became needles. Before the answer was action. Now action was gone. There were days when Bo sat for a very long time in the living room, staring at his neatly arranged athletic shoes, as if lacing them up would somehow put everything back in place. But no, time does not negotiate with dead bone. He learned to walk again from the beginning, step by cautious step, not to return to competition, but to live without sharp pain. In physical therapy sessions, he understood a cruel truth. The strength that had once been a curse was now gone, and he had to learn to exist without it. No longer having a body to explain himself, that was more terrifying than any medical diagnosis. Bo stayed away from the media, not out of bitterness, but out of exhaustion. The questions always circled around what if and if only, making him feel trapped in a windowless room. He didn't want pity, and he didn't want to be built into a broken-winged legend. He wanted silence, to try listening to what was left inside him when the noise disappeared. And in that silence, he discovered a sadness without drama, without tears, just a prolonged absence. The sadness of someone who once lived by speed, now forced to accept a slower pace as a new discipline. Relationships changed too. Old teammates moved on with their lives. New seasons came and went. New faces appeared on magazine covers. Bo congratulated them sincerely, but there was still a dark corner in his heart. He had left the game too soon, not because of a lack of talent, but because biology had spoken. He learned how to attend the funeral of his own dream. No flowers, no eulogy, just the acknowledgement that some things are not allowed to return. In those years of existential crisis, Bo did not turn to loud escapes. He turned to family, to small habits, to quiet endurance. His willpower was no longer about running faster, jumping higher. It became about waking up every day and not letting emptiness swallow him whole. He focused on things few people noticed, taking care of his health, doing charity work quietly, staying close to people who didn't demand that he be a legend. Gradually, he understood that identity is not only in what we do best, but also in how we face it when that thing disappears. Bo did not cry in public, but there were long nights when memories flooded back like an out-of-season rain. The moments of explosive speed, the runs that tore through the wind, the stunned looks from opponents, all became old films replayed in his mind. He didn't chase them away. He let them stay, as proof that he had once lived fully. And then, very slowly, a new awareness formed. He didn't need to deny the past to exist in the present. He could carry it with him, not as a burden, but as a foundation. Bo's existential crisis did not end with a brilliant awakening moment. It settled, little by little, as he accepted that the question, "Who am I?" no longer had a single answer. He was the man who once made America gasp at his speed, and he was also the man who learned to live when speed left him. In that empty space, Bo did not disappear. He restructured himself, quietly, persistently, with a willpower that no longer needed a field to prove itself. And it was there, in that long silence, that Bo Jackson began to learn a different kind of strength, the strength of continuing to live when what made you is gone. After the long period of existential crisis, Bo Jackson did not choose to come back to tell his story. He also did not choose to turn his pain into a platform. Instead, he withdrew, not loudly, not with declarations, not with a farewell statement. That withdrawal happened so slowly that almost no one noticed it was occurring. Bo simply stopped appearing. No talk shows, no memoir, no series of looking back interviews. In a culture that worships storytelling to be remembered, Bo Jackson chose the opposite, silence to survive. He understood very clearly how the media works. It needs drama, needs tears, needs shocking clips. But his story, if trimmed to fit the frame, would lose its most essential core, dignity. So he stayed away from the lenses like avoiding a cold wind. Not out of fear, but because he didn't want to be boxed into the broken-winged legend or the ruined genius. Bo did not tell his story because he didn't want it to become someone else's property. That silence came with a price. When you don't narrate yourself, others will tell it for you, in fragmented pieces, in assumptions, in endless what-ifs. But Bo accepted that price. He did not exploit pity, did not turn tragedy into a brand. He refused invitations that could have brought him back into the spotlight through a detour. For Bo, being remembered with compassion was not honor, it was distortion. He didn't need the audience to understand how much he had hurt. He only needed not to be turned into a quick consumption story. And so, his withdrawal gradually became a form of social death. No funeral, no moment of silence, just an absence that stretched on, until it felt familiar. Time passed, seasons followed one another, new stars appeared and disappeared at the pace of modern entertainment. Bo Jackson, who once made America stop and watch, became a name mentioned less and less, mostly in nostalgic debates, not because he was less great, but because he was no longer there to remind others. In a society of constant presence, absence equals forgetting, and Bo accepted that as an ethical choice. He didn't want his past exploited to serve someone else's present. He didn't want his pain used as illustration for bite-sized lessons. He wanted to live the rest of his life without having to play the lead in his own story. Being forgotten while still alive is a different kind of pain, quiet and persistent. It doesn't strike the heart directly, it grinds slowly. There were days when Bo realized young people no longer knew who he was. There were times his name was mentioned with a question of confirmation, but he didn't correct them, he didn't argue, he let the silence do its work. Because deep down, Bo understood that collective memory is fragile, trying to hold on to it at all costs only distorts it. He preferred to be forgotten the right way, quietly, rather than remembered the wrong way, noisily. In that withdrawal, Bo built another life, one few people saw but solid enough to stand on. No packed schedule, no demand to appear. He took care of his health, maintained daily discipline, stayed close to family, did things that didn't require cameras. That wasn't running away, it was redefining presence. Presence was no longer standing in the middle of a stadium, it was being fully there in small moments, where no one expected a performance. And it was there that Bo found a belated kind of freedom, freedom from expectation. Bo Jackson's social death was not a failure, it was the consequence of a difficult choice. In a world that rewards noise, he chose silence. In an economy of attention, he refused to consume his own pain, and therefore he was forgotten, but not defeated. That unseen withdrawal was a silent declaration that some people do not need a stage to exist, and some legacies do not need to be repeated every day to retain their value. Bo Jackson disappeared from the crowd's view, but he did not disappear from himself, and in that prolonged quiet, he preserved what the spotlight could never protect, the dignity of a man who went to the very end and knew when to stop. After a withdrawal so quiet, it was almost absolute, Bo Jackson stepped into the harshest room of his life, a prison without doors, without bars, but with no way out. It was called What If. No one locked him in there, his own memories and the imagination of history did it. Every time the media mentioned him, rarely and sporadically, it came with a question that required no answer. If not for the injury, what would Bo Jackson have been? That question wasn't seeking truth, it was seeking the pleasure of speculation. And for someone who once lived by the reality of his body, speculation was the cruelest thing. In imaginary rankings and nostalgic debates, Bo was placed next to names that never lived like him, people who chose one sport, preserved their bodies, extended careers according to safe logic. Those comparisons sounded harmless, even flattering, but for Bo, every time he heard them it was a slow knife, because they denied the core. He didn't fail from lack of discipline or vision, he paid the price for going farther than biology allowed. What If turned pain into an intellectual game, turned sacrifice into a footnote. It suggested a path that never existed, and asked why he didn't take it. In that room, every wall was a mirror, reflecting seasons that never happened, titles never awarded, numbers never recorded. Bo refused to participate. He didn't sit at round tables to dissect alternate scenarios. He didn't write a memoir to answer questions he didn't even believe were fair. That refusal wasn't avoidance. It was self-defense. Because Bo understood clearly, if he accepted the what-if game, he would spend the rest of his life comparing himself to a perfect ghost, the painless, limitless, consequence-free version. No one wins a confrontation with their own ghost, and so he chose silence as a boundary line. On this side was the present, flawed, finite but real. On the other side was speculation, perfect, infinite, but fake. The most painful part of What If was not what was lost, but the way it restructured memory. It made every fully lived moment feel not enough. It made the greatness that happened feel like a draft. Bo had once made America hold its breath, had bent the laws of speed and power, yet with one speculation, it all went under question. Every if only was a knife, because it did not respect the reality paid for with flesh and blood. It demanded that the person involved justify their own survival, an inhumane demand. There were nights when Bo thought about the roads not taken, not to regret, but to close them. He looked back with the calm of someone who understood that history is not a straight line, and identity is not the sum of hypotheticals. He remembered clearly the feeling of running, colliding, swinging, not as data, but as complete experience. And he also remembered clearly the feeling of pain, not as tragedy, but as the price of living fully. In that memory, there was no what if, only it was. But history does not let go easily. It returns through anniversary articles, highlight reels, late-night debates. Each time Bo had to close the doorless prison, reminding himself that he owed no one an answer. He didn't need to prove his choice was right, by safe standards. He only needed to stay loyal to the truth that he had lived the only way he knew. And that loyalty, though painful, was what kept him from being crushed by speculation. At this most painful peak, Bo learned a bitter but liberating lesson. History loves speculation because it's cheap. It costs nothing. The person who lived it is different. They paid with body, with youth, with the ability to walk without pain. When he understood that, Bo stopped wanting to be understood correctly in debates. He let history do its work, and he did the work of living. Every morning without excessive pain was a small victory. Every step without comparison was freedom. What If is a doorless prison because it promises hope while never allowing you to touch it. Bo had been there long enough to know that no one escapes by arguing. The only way out is to turn your back. And Bo turned his back, not with resentment, not with bitterness, just with the quiet resolve of someone who understands that the value of a life does not lie in what could have happened, but in what was lived to the fullest. In that turning away, he did not reclaim the stage. He reclaimed the right to exist without being measured by hypotheticals, and that in a world addicted to what if, is the quietest but most complete victory. After turning his back on the what if prison, Bo Jackson did not step into a peaceful chapter, but into an extended reality, a life measured by pain, limits and round-the-clock medical discipline with no days off. Living with a body that no longer belongs to you is an experience hard to describe. It's like being inside a familiar house, where every door sticks, every staircase is steeper than yesterday, and every movement requires prior permission. Chronic pain becomes the background noise of life, not loud, but persistent. There are mornings when joint stiffness arrives like a cold reminder that last night was not restoration, only a temporary lull. There are afternoons when one off-rhythm step is enough to drag hours of discomfort behind it. For Bo, pain was no longer an alarm signal. It became a condition of existence. Movement limitations were the humbling lesson he had to learn late. Actions that were once instinct now had to be calculated. How many degrees to turn, how low to bend, how long to sit before standing. Every choice carried consequences. No audience witnessed those calculations. No one applauded when he stopped at the right moment to avoid prolonged pain. But that very stopping was the new victory. Small, private, and essential. Lifelong medical discipline replaced training discipline, regular physical therapy, joint-protecting exercises, an anti-inflammatory diet, precise medication schedules. Every small deviation had a cost. For someone who once believed the body would endure, having to follow strict rules was an identity reversal. Willpower was no longer measured by maximum effort, but by the ability to restrain. No day let Bo forget the loss. It appeared in seemingly harmless moments, an old video clip flashing by, a conversation about sports, a field seen from a distance. The loss did not explode, it seeped, but Bo learned to live with it without letting it define his entire being. He neither denied the past, nor worshipped it. He kept memory in its proper place as foundation, not as chains. The hardest part was not the pain, but the change in how value is measured. When speed was gone, explosiveness was gone, schedules were gone, value did not appear on its own. It had to be rebuilt, from small habits, from presence with family, from completing a day without crossing the safety line. Medical discipline turned time into a strict structure. Each day had its own rhythm, careful warm-ups, purposeful rest, avoidance of risky surfaces and situations. For Bo, freedom was no longer doing everything. Freedom was knowing what not to do. That shift was painful, because it ran counter to a lifetime of being taught that pushing limits was virtue. Now pushing limits was recklessness, and recklessness could take away what little remained. Bo accepted that lesson with quiet seriousness. No speeches, no complaints, just the steady repetition of doing the right things, day after day. There were times when loneliness slipped in amid the discipline, when you have to explain why you can't join, why you have to leave early, why you need to rest. Bo did not turn that into tragedy, he turned it into boundaries. Those who understood stayed, those who didn't understand, didn't stay. That filtering, though painful, created a safer circle. Within that circle, Bo could be a person before being an icon. He learned to listen to the new body, not to conquer it, but to cooperate with it. Every pain signal was noted, every good day was appreciated without fanfare. That was a kind of humility only those who have lost the most can learn. Living with a body that no longer belongs to you is also living with time in a different way. No more counting seasons, counting recovery cycles. No more setting breakthrough goals, setting stability goals. Bo did not romanticize this. He knew it was mundane, repetitive, and sometimes heavy. But he also knew that endurance lives here in choosing correctly every day. The loss did not disappear, it was managed. The pain did not disappear, it was regulated. And amid all those no's, Bo found small yeses, gradually more pain-free mornings, complete afternoon walks, uninterrupted nights of sleep. Those yeses didn't make headlines, but they kept him standing. In the end, this extended reality did not grant Bo a neat conclusion. It granted him a path, difficult, narrow but real. Living with a body that no longer belongs to you forced him to rewrite the definition of strength. Strength is knowing when to stop, knowing how to care, knowing how to accept, and in that acceptance, Bo did not lose his dignity. He preserved it through discipline, through silence, and through the determination to live fully within the new limits, never forgetting the loss, but never letting the loss decide everything that remained. After years of living with chronic pain and harsh medical discipline, Bo Jackson faced another truth, quiet but no less cruel. His biological legacy would never be completed, not because of a lack of talent, not because of a lack of effort, but because time, the uncompromising one, closed the door while the story was still unfinished. In the American sports world, where legacy is often measured by strings of records, by statistics stretched across many seasons, Bo became a paradox. He did not have a long enough stat sheet to stack high, no complete career arc to draw. His numbers stand there, brilliant but solitary, like mountain peaks with no connecting slopes. The tragedy lies in this. Bo did not lack peaks. He lacked time. Records need repetition to be recognized. Bo had no chance to repeat. His power appeared as a phenomenon, sudden, overwhelming, then vanished before history could build a frame around it. So when people talk about the greatest, his name is often pulled from the list for a legitimate but cold reason, not long enough. That argument is correct by statistical standards, but it misses something fundamental. Some standards do not need time to prove themselves. They exist in collective memory, in the feeling of having witnessed something unrepeatable. No complete record also means no familiar milestones to tell the story the usual way. No 10th historic season, no great comeback, no rounded ending. Only memory, fragmented, powerful, and hard to frame. Memory of speed unlike any human. Memory of power that made opponents hesitate. Memory of a body that seemed born to break every limit, only to be stopped by biology itself. Those memories do not form a chart, they spread like legend, and legend does not need certification, but it is also not protected by the system. The tragedy of the unfinished also lies in how the legacy is misunderstood. When there are no long enough stats, what happened is easily seen as a sample, but Bo was not a sample, he was a truncated standard. That standard had no time to replicate itself, no direct successors. Those who came after could be faster, stronger, more durable, but they arrived in a world that had already learned how to preserve. Bo arrived before that lesson was learned, and so he paid the price on behalf of the entire system. His biological legacy stops at an unanswered question: how far can the human body go if unrestrained? That question will never be finished, because the one who posed it no longer had the chance to answer. In that unfinished state, Bo chose a rare attitude. He did not argue to be recognized correctly. He did not demand that history adjust its measuring stick for him. He let the legacy exist as it was, incomplete, but honest. That honesty is harder to accept than any record. It forces observers to face the truth that greatness does not always come with longevity, and that the greatest standards sometimes appear and disappear before we can name them. Only memory remains, but that memory does not fade. It lives in footage replayed not to count numbers, but to feel a moment that will not repeat. It lives in stories told with different eyes, where the teller lowers their voice when speaking of the price paid. It lives in the respectful silence of those who understand that some legacies cannot be measured by length. For Bo, an unfinished biological legacy is not failure, it is a reminder that the human body, no matter how extraordinary, is still finite, that a system that worships peaks needs to learn how to protect people, and that some standards, even if cut short, are still powerful enough to change how we view limits. As history continues forward, Bo Jackson does not stand at the end of a long road lined with signposts. He stands at a missed fork, where the story stopped earlier than expected, but it is that very stopping that creates both the tragedy and its unique beauty. A biological legacy never completed, but forever haunting, not because of what it achieved, but because of what it opens, about potential, about cost, and about our responsibility. When we witness a standard appear too early for its own era, after fully confronting the tragedy of an unfinished biological legacy, Bo Jackson chose the hardest path. He did not blame fate. In a world where injury is often turned into complaint, where pain easily becomes legal files or public campaigns, Bo did not do that. No lawsuits, no hunt for accountability, no bitter statements aimed at the leagues, teams, or system that once celebrated and then abandoned him. Bo's silence was not blind resignation, it was a conscious choice, a way to retain the last shred of autonomy when so much had already been taken. Not suing meant refusing a familiar escape. Bo understood that litigation could bring a superficial sense of justice, could turn pain into numbers, could create a story with winners and losers. But he also understood the other cost: memories stretched taut, wounds reopened, life trapped in the past. He did not want the rest of his life defined by courtrooms, by cold arguments, dissecting every painful moment. He did not want to turn his body into evidence. That refusal was an act of self-respect, rare and expensive. Not blaming also means not rewriting history to excuse himself. Bo did not say he was forced, nor did he say someone ruined him. He did not build a story where he was purely a victim. Instead, he accepted the complex truth. He chose to live that way, in a system that encouraged that choice. And biology spoke. Acceptance is not denial of the system's responsibility. Acceptance is refusal to reduce the story to a single arrow. In Bo, acceptance took the form of late maturity, not easy at all, but necessary to keep living. Not becoming bitter is the longest challenge. Bitterness often comes later, when the pain settles and memory starts demanding compensation. Bo was not immune to that temptation. He too had nights wondering why everything had to happen that way. But he did not nurture the question into hatred. He did not let it become the lens through which he viewed the world. Instead, he kept distance from triggers, avoiding pointless debates, avoiding provocative comparisons, avoiding prolonged what-ifs. That emotional discipline is praised less than physical strength, but it demands a different kind of courage, the courage to let go. Acceptance as a non-appealable sentence may sound cold, but for Bo it was the only way to move forward, without being yanked back. That sentence was not handed down by a court, it was imposed by biology and time. Not appealing does not mean agreeing with the injustice, it means not letting the injustice become the center of life. Bo did not need exoneration to exist, he needed peace to live the rest of his life within the new limits, and that peace only comes when the war with the past ends. The honor in Bo Jackson's silence lies in the fact that he preserved his dignity when every other tool was available to do the opposite. He did not use pain as capital. He did not turn the disappearance of his legacy into a reason to attack. He did not demand the world apologize. Instead, he lived steadily, disciplined, and without show, as an affirmation that a person's value does not lie in the ability to win lawsuits or win arguments, but in how they endure without losing themselves. In that acceptance, Bo did not become smaller, he became clearer, clear about what happened, clear about what cannot be changed, clear about his own responsibility in past choices, and clear about continuing to live without needing an audience. Some heroes are honored with monuments, some are honored with silence. Bo Jackson belongs to the latter, not because he lacked greatness, but because he was strong enough not to need to prove it again. After the man chose silence as a form of self-mastery, America began to look back, slowly, cautiously, and belatedly. Bo Jackson did not return to lead this retrospection. It happened after he had already stepped out of the center of the story. The media, once intoxicated by the peaks and indifferent to the cost, began opening the archives, slow-motion clips, longer articles, headlines no longer rushed. People spoke of the phenomenon of the unprecedented, of the price of two worlds. The tone changed, less boastful, more reflective. But tone, no matter how sincere, cannot turn back time. It only confirms one thing: when caution arrives, the one who needed it most is no longer there to benefit. Other legends began to acknowledge, not in grand ceremonies, but in scattered remarks, an interview snippet, a late-written memory, a half-confession. They said they had never seen anyone like that if he had chosen one path, history would have been different, that the system back then was not mature enough to protect an exception. Those acknowledgments brought relief to the speakers, but to Bo they were only echoes. He had already gone through the years when acknowledgment was needed most in silence. Late recognition does not erase chronic pain, does not extend a career, does not return lost seasons. It only places an explanatory plaque in front of a door that has already closed. The bitterest part of belated awareness is that it is often accurate. History, when it has enough facts, usually draws the correct conclusion, but that correctness arrives after the damage. Analyses now speak of load management, of biological preservation, of the risks of overlapping intensity. Those terms, if they had appeared earlier, might have changed the trajectory. But history does not operate on what if. It operates on consequences, and the consequence here is an unfinished legacy and a man who had to learn to live with permanent limits. When America looked back, Bo had already left the story in his own way. He did not join retrospective roundtables, did not appear as the main witness to the lesson history was trying to write, not because he did not care, but because he chose not to let his present life be pulled back into the past. While the media searched for language to say we were wrong, Bo was living at a different rhythm, slow, disciplined, and private. That distance revealed the misalignment. Society needs icons to learn lessons. The person involved needs peace to survive. Those two needs rarely meet at the right time. Belated awareness also exposes another paradox. When legends are better protected, they become less legendary in the old sense. The new system creates durability, but it also removes the boundary-pushing moments that once made crowds hold their breath. Bo belonged to a different era, when boundaries were not yet clearly drawn, when greatness was allowed to be reckless. Looking back, people feel both pity and nostalgia, but nostalgia is not a cure. It only reminds us that some lessons must be paid for by people who are never allowed to be complete. History cannot be rewritten, only annotated. Those annotations, however fairer, do not change the plot. Bo Jackson will forever be a short but intense chapter, a chapter that forces the reader to pause, set the book down, and ask about the responsibility of applause. When society celebrates an exception, society must also protect that exception. When society fails to do so, the looking back, however honest, still comes too late. In recent years, that looking back has become more systematic. Commemorative programs, long-form articles, expert debates, all contribute to shaping a more mature awareness. But Bo does not step into the frame to receive flowers. He stands outside, like a character who long ago completed his part. That does not diminish him. It makes the story clearer, clear that greatness does not need a crowd to confirm it, clear that the most important lessons are often written in the ink of pain. When America looks back, too late, what remains is not collective guilt, but continuing responsibility. The responsibility to build systems that do not demand exceptions, sacrifice themselves. The responsibility to put people before icons. Bo Jackson is not there to demand this. He has left the story, but his absence is the strongest reminder that history, even when it understands correctly, rarely fixes what has already happened. And therefore the most honest way to honor is not in retrospection, but in making sure a story like this never repeats. After all the belated turns of history, after the acknowledgments that arrive when every door has closed, Bo Jackson stands at an ending that is not the conclusion of a victory story, but of a life forced to stop. He did not collapse the way people imagine. No moment of breakdown in front of cameras, no dramatic shattering of spirit. He was forced to stop. That is the crucial difference. Stop not for lack of will, not for lack of desire, but because the body, the machine that once carried him beyond every definition, could no longer bear the destiny it had itself opened. This is absolute tragedy, with no redemption, no victory to close it, no miracle to reverse it, no resurrection to soothe memory, only a human being continuing to live with the part of life that was stolen. In this epilogue, there is no light at the end of the tunnel, not because darkness wins, but because truth does not allow embellishment. Bo Jackson was not granted a full comeback chapter to balance pain with glory, nor did he need a replacement icon to patch things up. What he had, and kept, was the dignity of a man who went to the very end and knew when to stop. His tragedy does not lie in losing what could have been achieved, but in having to learn to live when the map of life was torn in half midway. That learning is not loud, it happens every morning, every cautious step, every decision that puts health before desire. It is a new discipline, the discipline of existence. No victory means no titles to hang on the wall as justification. No miracle means no surgery that returns the past. No resurrection means no final season to close the book. Those no's pile up, creating a prolonged emptiness. And Bo lives in that emptiness, not filling it with noise, not hiding it with nostalgia. He lets it be there, as part of the present. The stolen part of life does not turn into hatred, it turns into a boundary. Beyond that boundary, he allows no one to pull him back into pointless debates, cruel hypotheticals, cost-free comparisons. Some will call that resignation, but resignation is when you give up. In Bo it is active acceptance, a form of courage without a stage, accepting that the body is no longer the means to speak for the man, accepting that value must be rewritten with smaller, slower, but truer measures, accepting that the remaining life does not need to make up for what was lost. That acceptance does not heal the wound, it prevents the wound from controlling every decision, and that is the only way to continue. This epilogue is not meant to teach a comfortable lesson. It only states a hard-to-swallow truth. Some people are not destroyed by failure, but by the moment their bodies can no longer carry their destiny. Bo Jackson did not fail. He also did not win. He lived within limits, within chronic pain, within discipline, and kept himself from being turned into an illustration. When the lights have long gone out, he still wakes up every day with the sole responsibility of not betraying the present. That responsibility is heavier than any trophy. The stolen part of life is not returned by history's apologies, It is only acknowledged when society learns to protect people before icons. But that learning comes late, and Bo is not there to wait. He has left the story, carrying a silence that has weight. In that silence, there is no victory statement, only steadfastness, not letting tragedy define the whole, not letting pain become a brand, not letting the past drain the present. At this ending, the only thing left is the bare truth. A man who once exceeded every limit was forced to stop, not because he was weak, but because he was too strong in a system that did not yet know how to protect exceptions. There is no resurrection to soothe memory, but there is also no collapse to pity, only a man continuing to live. No audience needed, with limits accepted, with discipline maintained, with dignity non-negotiable. Some men are not broken by failure, they are broken by the moment their bodies can no longer carry their destiny. Bo Jackson did not collapse, he was forced to stop, and in that stopping, he did not seek redemption. He sought truth, enough to live the rest of his life without needing to prove anything more. The story of Bo Jackson leaves a quiet but profound pain, because this is not the tragedy of failure, but the tragedy of a man who went too far beyond what the human body is allowed to endure. Throughout the script, we witness a child growing up in harsh Alabama, learning endurance instead of asking for help, then becoming a rare biological phenomenon at Auburn, where his power, speed, and reflexes were celebrated as superhuman. It was from there that the tragedy was seeded. When the body becomes the entire identity, the day the body betrays is also the day the man is stripped of his identity. The moment in 1991, when Bo dislocated his hip, stood up and walked amid the crowd's cheers, is the most painful detail, because inside, the bone had begun to die, while outside America was still consuming him as an entertainment product named Bo Knows. What makes Bo Jackson worthy of honor is not only what he once achieved, but how he faced what was taken from him. He did not sue, did not blame, did not turn pain into media capital. He accepted a vascular necrosis, accepted hip replacement while still young, accepted the immediate end of the NFL and the unfinished MLB dream, then quietly withdrew from public life while still alive. For American audiences, the lesson here is extremely clear and necessary. A society that celebrates peaks, but is indifferent to survival, will always produce similar tragedies. Bo Jackson reminds us that greatness should not be measured by how much a person can be exploited, but by how society knows to stop in time to protect the human being behind the icon. This is not just the story of a sports legend, but a warning for every field where people are forced to sacrifice health, humanity, and future for brief moments of glory. If the story of Bo Jackson makes you pause to think about the real cost of greatness, please subscribe to the channel to continue accompanying other extraordinary yet deeply lost fates. Thank you for listening to the very end, and see you in the next video, where we will continue to look straight at the truth behind the legends that history often forgets.